Hey guys, Saf here with another Raid Shadow Legends video, and in today's video we're going to be talking about the new boss that is coming to Raid Shadow Legends, Akumori the Phantom Shogun. Now this boss, when you read it, looks absolutely terrifying, but I've been doing a bit of reading and I've been trying to read between the lines and trying to think, how is this going to work? And I think there is some ways we can get around it, but I will say right now, if you do not have Awakening, this becomes very, very difficult. So that is a key thing to note. It is tied to the Awakening mechanic and it has new effects. What we're going to do in this video, I'm going to look at it and see if I can figure out a way to make this accessible for players, because right now, when I first read this, I was instantly saying to the guys in the Hellhades chat, you know, in our internal chat in the HH Gaming, this is like impossible for players. My first reaction was, this looks impossible. I don't know how anyone could do it, but I think there is some ways to work around the new passives. So let's first have a look at the main thing that this boss has. So the boss is basically formed around this new shade tracker. It looks like the Griffin kind of thing, or the Dark Fade tracker. It's a passive stackable count that basically increases the boss's power as it grows. Now, the way that this shade tracker grows is if you weak hit, it increases the shade counter by 8, right? The Shroud of the Shogun is a lot of words in here, but let me just break it down into very simple language for you. If you weak hit, it increases by 8. For every shade counter stack that the boss has, he is going to place crit rate by 1% and crit damage by 2%. He's going to increase his damage. So the higher the stack, the harder he's likely to hit, because he's more likely to crit. Now, this is really formed around his Enfeeble debuff. It is a brand new debuff coming to this game mode, where basically, if you are enfeebled, you always weak hit. Now, if you remove that enfeeble, you also increase his shade counter by 2. But you can decrease this shade counter if you are awakened. Now, I will say I despise this mechanic. I think this is like the worst mechanic. If you haven't gone and seen it, go check out Ash's video from yesterday. He basically did a video where he pulled, I think, something like 12 or 11 Eternal Soul Stones. The big stones, right? Sacred Shard, essentially, for souls. And he got 12 5-star epic souls. The best stone, and he walked away with absolutely nothing. So I will be honest, if you want us to be getting awakening levels to complete this dungeon, you have got to do something about that. I felt really bad watching it. I felt like I wanted to just like quit the game watching that video. It was so bad watching him pull soul after soul of pointless epic champions that you don't use, that are not useful for that kind of content. We've got to remember, is high awakening is very much focused on legendary champions. When you start looking at really needing these souls, when you want to do this dungeon, you need it on legendary, and the odds for you getting legendary souls are atrocious. So if you want to make game modes around awakening, fine, but you need to increase the accessibility of the soul system. The soul tournament chase is awful return rates. I think Ash pulled like 100 tier 1s, like 50 tier 2, and like 12 tier 3s, and walked away with 4,000 points. Now, some people in my comments on yesterday's video were like, well, you know, it's only 1,500 points. Sure, but I mean, come on. Like, it feels awful that you pull all those souls and you basically barely get any points and you get nothing out of it. Like, you got no usable souls. They need to do something about that. Boosted odds, better return rates, change the percentages, something. Because if you want to require me to bring souls to this game mode, that is not going to work. That's the first kind of like, I just want to get out of the way. Souls need a review because it's not good enough. But anyway, if you've got a high awakening, you reduce the shade counter. So the TLDR so far, you weak hit plus 8. You remove the enfeeble plus 2. And if you hit with an awakening, depending on the level, it's basically minus whatever awakening level you're at. So if it's a 6-star, you remove 6. Every one counter that you get will increase this crit rate by 1% and crit damage by 2%. I think it can go up to something like 50. So, you know, there's a potential that you can, like, I don't even know if it stops, basically. It only does effects up to around 40. If it's at 50, he's going to get like 65% crit rate. So you've got to be really careful. Ideally, you don't want to go any higher than 10. That is the goal here. You don't want to go any higher than 10. If you do that, you can bring decreased crit rate and then you'll be fine. Or you can bring someone like Dark Kale. So what happens when the shade counter increases as well? Well, things start getting pretty scary. He's immune to turn meter reduction effects and enfeeble. Makes sense. You can't stop him taking turns. Whenever the shade counter reaches 10, he doesn't take poison damage. When it reaches 20, he doesn't take brimstone, smite, or HP burn. When it reaches 30, he doesn't receive damage from skills from mastery, so no war master and no maximum HP. When it hits 40, he ignores all of your defense. So if that counter gets really above 10, you can't do anything. Maybe 20 is fine if you're not using poison, but really, like, it's going to be a nightmare if you get allowed to get above 10. So that's the first thing. Also, whenever he kills an enemy, you are when he kills an enemy, he's going to attack all enemies. So you've got to be very careful about like dying. You need to stay alive. So that's kind of like how that shade tracker works here. You want to keep it below 10. If you get it any higher, the boss will become impossible. But again, realistically, you're going to need souls in some capacity to try and reduce this counter. So let's talk about his skills here. The way that I think this is going to work, there is, I think, a cheat code that we can do here to make this easier. Forest of Spears is this opening ability, and what he's going to do is place Enfeeble. There are 2 abilities in his skill set that can place the Enfeeble debuff, and of course the Enfeeble debuff is what sets off his shade counter because it converts you to weak affinity. The top boss isn't void, so you also need to make sure that the champions you use are not going to be negative affinity to avoid it as well. He's going to open with Forest of Spears. This is how I understand it to be. And then he's also going to follow up with Scourge Sword or Wraith Javelin at the same time. And the targeting is around Enfeeble. I know they mentioned something about Taunt buff being in effect. I would ignore Taunt completely. There are 2 champions in the game that have Taunt. One of them is Dwedan, the Runic, who is never going to fit into a team because he's an epic champion. It's on a long cooldown. It's just not going to work. And the other one is Green Warden Ruark, who is a legendary champion. Chances are you haven't got him because he's a new champion. There's only 2 champions. Unless they add another 6 champions with Taunt, it's a mechanic that you can't rely on. So I'm ignoring that mechanic entirely. I don't think you need to worry about it. So what's going to happen with Forest of Spears? It's going to attack the enemy with the highest crit damage. Before attacking, it's going to place block passive skills, and it's going to place Enfeeble after attacking, and both cannot be removed, blocked, or resisted. So you're always going to take Enfeeble every single time, okay? You're always going to take it with the highest crit damage, but you can direct it. You can pick the champion you want with highest crit damage. He's then going to follow up with Scourge Sword, where he's going to attack a single target. He's going to pick the Enfeeble target he just attacked. And after attacking, he's going to remove all buffs from your team except the initial target. So he's going to full buff cleanse. Then he's going to apply a debuff spread, taking an Enfeeble debuff from the initial target and placing it on all enemies. But what we notice here is you can resist these effects. So as long as the boss's accuracy numbers are not insane, we don't know, they might be. You could have to bring decreased accuracy to stop this. You can basically make it so that he cannot do anything to the initial target. You need to basically make a Enfeeble tank. Just like you have a Mischief tank in Hydra, you need an Enfeeble tank. So what you would do is you would have someone who is ultra slow because you don't want him to attack because he's going to be enfeebled. Every time he attacks, he's going to increase the shade counter. That has got the highest crit damage, that he's in ultra high resistance, so that he basically sits there and just goes, keep attacking me. Why? Because Spectral Lunge, Scourge Sword, and Wraith Javelin is going to pick the Enfeeble target. If nobody else has got Enfeeble, he always attacks your one guy. So you just need to keep that one person alive. Super high crit damage, or more than anyone else, super high resistance, super high defensiveness, and keep him healing and super slow so he doesn't actually lose the Enfeeble buff. So that's the first thing you want, is that one target there who basically does nothing. If you can then stop that target getting debuff spread, well, you don't get Enfeeble on anyone else, and it's not a removable one. If he spreads the unremovable Enfeeble, you've lost the game. Simple as. I cannot see a way that you complete this game mode because of the way that the shade tracker goes up if you allow this Enfeeble to be on every single one of your enemies unless those champions are 6-star awakening. Simple as. So for the 95% of players, you have to do this strategy, I think, where you basically make sure that this unremovable Enfeeble is not spread onto your allies. If you can stop that debuff spread, then we've got some options. He also does some additional things, also places decreased defense on 2 turns on all enemies who had an Enfeeble debuff. So again, you stop the spread, you stop the decreased defense. Finally, if there are no enemies under Enfeeble debuffs at the end of this attack, places an Enfeeble debuff on the enemy with the highest crit damage for 3 turns. So with Scourge Sword, he hits one target. So long as that target stays alive and he has high resistance, nothing happens. And if that target doesn't have Enfeeble anymore, he just gets Forest of Spears effect put back on him. But if he's super slow, he's always going to have Enfeeble. So what you basically do is you convert all of that text into attacks one enemy. That's all it does. He's then going to use Wraith Javelin over here. Attacks one enemies will prioritize and attacking enemies under Enfeeble. So he's going to pick your Enfeeble target. If the shade counter reaches 10, this attack will ignore block damage buffs. If the shade counter reaches 20, it will ignore unkillable buffs. If the shade counter reaches 30, it will ignore ally protection. If the shade counter reaches 40, it will ignore shield buffs. If you can keep your shade tracker below 10, or even below 20, we can Paragon cheese this, because Paragon will place Ignore Unkillable on himself. He cannot kill him. As long as Paragon has got high resistance, he will just sit there and Paragon will just keep doing it to himself. Now, the only thing is full auto, will Paragon target himself? That's the only thing you need to figure out, but you could do it that way. The other way you could do it is you could use some sort of like Leorius that has a cooldownable effect, but he's going to be going really slow, or you just make him survive. If we can tank the damage but decrease attack, decrease crit rate, does he actually hit that hard? But essentially, again, if we have control over the shade tracker, all of these different texts, we just ignore it all. All it is another single attack. And then Spectral Lunge attacks one enemy, will prioritize attack in under and Enfeeble, so he's going to pick your Enfeeble target, then attacks all other enemies under Enfeeble. Each hit fills the turn meter by 20%. Again, if you don't spread the Enfeeble, then all of these effects do not matter. Now, I do think that once people figure this one out, they're going to probably bug fix this. Unless they make this debuff spread unblockable, like unresistible, like the whole game mode becomes super easy because all you do is you just have that Enfeeble target and keep him alive. If you just keep that Enfeeble target alive, it doesn't really matter what happens. Now, there are additional passives on this boss. He's got the Awakened passive that you see on all the hard mode dungeons. It looks like he's got the standard immunity, so you can't stun, sleep, petrify, all those things. It looks like he's got some sort of additional passive as well for things such as the Almighty Strength, right? So it looks like he's going to cap enemy max HP. I don't know if we're going to get the normal 50k HP stack that we saw added into Iron Twins. So there are strategies. I think there's going to be either a ninja or some sort of R-tack or some sort of Geomancer strategy, because he's only ever going to attack a single target and you just HP burn him down, as we do with every other boss. You could even do poisons, but probably he's going to have a secret passive that reduces poison by 90%. Sand Devil had it, so I would imagine that's the case. Although it might only be 60% because it does say he's immune to poison debuffs. And then you just want to bring enough utility to reduce his damage output. So you could bring decreased crit rate, decreased attack, something of that nature. So the strategy is simple. Make an Enfeeble target with high resistance, slow speed, and make sure he can't be debuff spread, and then just kill the boss. As simple as that. However, what are you going to get from it? Well, you're going to get Artifact Accessory Extension. What are you going to get? These are the stats that you can get on those accessory extensions. I don't know the exact numbers. This is in like from what the game code suggests and what's compatible, but it makes sense, right? Because the top level, you've got the primary stats is what you can get on all the other stats, right? The primary stats on the chest is basically what you can get. So it's going to be the same here. So you're going to be able to get crit damage, flat attack, flat defense, and flat HP on the amulet, accuracy, resistance on the banner, and then flat attack, flat defense, HP across the board. To be honest, rings are kind of pointless. Rings are like the top row. They're okay, but they're not essential. The crit damage or accuracy resistance is what you're going to want more than anything else. So you will spend far less time in this dungeon than you will Sand Devil because you've got half the amount of accessories you need to ascend. So there you go. So that's the strategy so far that I can see. Otherwise, if you do anything else, this game mode is unplayable. If that strategy is removed, this game mode is unplayable unless you have High Awakening. And if they do that, 95% of the player base, they'll not play the game mode. It won't work because there's no way that you can get that many unless you're willing to spend thousands of pounds. Thousands. Like Ash's video that I referenced earlier is probably somewhere in the region of a couple of $100 minimum, and he got nothing of utility, nothing of use. At least when you buy a couple of $100 of shards, you're probably going to pick up a few champions that you can use. Like, he picked up souls that are very, very useless to some extent. So definitely, if they defeat this strategy, I think that it's going to work, where you basically just put it all into a single champion and keep him alive, then I think it's going to be like a failed game mode. But it could be quite fun if they leave that strategy up, because it's all about building that Enfeeble target. When I started recording this video, I thought it was going to be really bad, really negative, but actually I'm looking forward to seeing if I can try and make that Enfeeble target stay alive. It could be quite fun and quite cool to do. I do think we're going to default back to the usual way of killing the boss in terms of Ninja, Chronum, R-Tack, Geomancer, like HP burn it and activate it down is probably the way to go. Or an Acrizia strategy. To try and knock him down as well could also work. Like double, it's probably going to be like Enfeeble target, triple Acrizia, and you kill it in 20 seconds or something. That's probably what's going to happen, but we'll see what happens there. But there you go, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.